This is like coming home. This is coming home to the old homestead. It's wonderfully refreshing and energizing. So thank you very much, everyone, for having me back. And yes, it's been many a year since I have not been here. My former wife and I had our children basically grow up here from the time that they were in grade school until they were teenagers. Unfortunately, our marriage disintegrated, and I sort of took a step back so that they could continue to come and be active if they so choose. So it's been a while. Let's go back to 2000, let's say. But nevertheless, I've been active and I've learned a lot from the society, and hopefully I'll tell you some of that today. So for anybody, well, I'm sure everybody is interested. I have three children that grew up here, Justin, Liz, and Katie. Justin and Liz are twins. They are now 40 years old, and Katie is 35. She has blessed us with two grandchildren, Aiden and Brooke. Aiden is 3, and Brooke is a year and a half. Katie and Justin live out in Colorado, and Liz lives in the city here. She does websites for school districts. Justin is a veterinarian. If anybody remembers Justin, they'll know he had animals flocking around him as a youngster, so nobody would be surprised. And Katie is a PA out in Colorado as well. So I'm very proud of them, very happy for them, and they are an integral part of my life at this point, and my husband's life as well. And it's just a wonderful thing to experience family again at this point. But in that interim period, when I stopped coming to the society, I spent a lot of time in Starbucks, sort of contemplating my life and getting not very far with that. But nevertheless, started up a conversation with a gentleman who was out and gay at that point, and we developed a very good friendship, which went on from there. And in 2011, Arthur Drobin was kind enough to marry us. So it's a wonderful thing. Unfortunately, he couldn't make it here today because we are moving. We're going from a house and the property and whatever else not to a condo, which hopefully will be a good thing and nice and quiet for us. But when I came out, and that happened in dribs and drabs, because quite honestly, I was afraid. I was fearful. I was guilty. I was embarrassed. And I think a lot of people my age, when they came out later in life, felt like that as well. And the reason is, in my estimation, I did not know what the LGBTQ community was like. I didn't have good experiences with people within the community. I was basically an outsider trying to work my way in. And then finally I said, you know what? This being on the fringe just isn't working for me either, because the Ethical Humanist Society taught me a lot more than that. So I'm gonna dive in, and I'm diving in all the way, as everybody here I'm sure still does. So I went to my partners, my business partners at that time, and I said, I've been looking around and there's nobody in Long Island, in any event, that knows anything about representing the LGBTQ community. I've been looking for an attorney for personal reasons for myself, and have not been able to find anybody. And there are a lot of issues and situations that the community needs representation for that they're just not getting. And by the way, I'm gay. And they all looked at me and said, okay, wow, sort of shocked, but nevertheless, joined with me in forming this new practice area. representing the community, and we've been happily engaged in representing the community now for over 20 years. But where were we back then? When we first started the practice area, there was no such thing as estate planning for the LGBTQ community. You could plan all you wanted, but for the most part, your legal relatives, blood relatives, always had the opportunity to supersede what you were doing. And when I say always had the opportunity, a will can only be opposed by somebody who is in fact a legal relative. So anybody that had a partner or was in a domestic relationship situation could in fact do a will and appoint their partner as the main beneficiary, et cetera, et cetera. But when it came down to probating that will in court, the court always had to pass upon the will and the executor, and the only people that were given notice of the probate of that will were legal relatives, meaning they were the only ones that had the ability to say, this will doesn't cut it because my deceased brother, son, whoever, was under undue influence. He or she was forced to sign this will, and they did it not knowing what they were doing. And over again, we saw this, whereby people were cut out of wills, people were left homeless, specifically homeless because they were left houses by their deceased partners. They were given the opportunity to at least stay in those houses for their lifetimes, hopefully, or at least for a number of years so that they could become acclimated on their own. And I saw people get dispossessed from houses. I saw cremations sold by family members to partners who had absolutely no ability to create their own funeral arrangements for their deceased partners. Their families took over because they were, again, the only ones that had the ability to do that. So there were a lot of conflicts back then between surviving partners for the most part and living relatives, and I'm not trying to say this was the overall aspect, but many family members at that point did not support their relative having a partner to the extent that they would agree to just allow their deceased relative to pass their assets on to that partner. So we had to draft around things, and we drafted, and we would put provisions into wills to the extent that I have known my partner for X number of years. I consider my partner to be my spouse and would in fact have my partner as my spouse if I could in fact marry my partner. And it went on and on and on and on. And we were pretty successful in doing that because the courts, when they looked at those wills, said, you know what, somebody can't be under undue influence and put this many provisions into their document and not know what they were doing. So a lot of these will contests sort of went by the wayside at that point, which was a good thing. But we still had the issues with making healthcare decisions for partners. You couldn't do it if a relative walked into the hospital or the healthcare facility and said, no, this guy is a friend of my brother, or they don't really know each other that well, can't make healthcare decisions. And by the way, he shouldn't really be here, so ask him to leave. And that happened over and over and over and over again. We're very lucky at this point in that we do have federal recognition in that area, whereby a partner has even an unmarried partner has the absolute right to visit their partner in a healthcare facility and to make decisions if they're given a healthcare proxy, which is something I make sure everybody has. And I mean that across the board, not just for people in our community, because many people don't realize that nobody has the right to make a healthcare decision for anyone else unless you have that healthcare proxy in place. That's just as an aside. So we had people who were becoming incompetent, who needed to be placed in long-term care facilities and had absolutely no say in the matter. And we found that people were being placed in facilities where they became very lonely and despondent. They felt that they didn't fit into those communities. And no matter how much their relatives fought to have them within these communities, they still weren't happy. And the current situation sort of remains very much the same because we have a number of people within the LGBT community who are in fact aging, but many of those people don't have relatives who are close to them just because of who they are. Many of those people don't have children. They're older, and many didn't have children at that point. And what we're finding now to be a real problem within the community is a lack of support, a lack of housing, and a lack of a sense of community. And I'll get back to that as to where we are now and where we need to go. But that's one of the issues that sort of remain, that something needs to be done. But we couldn't marry at that point, and we couldn't marry because of a federal law called DOMA, the Defense of Marriage Act. DOMA was put into law in 1977 by Clinton, as a matter of fact, in the middle of the night, so that nobody really had the opportunity to talk about it or to raise hell about it or even comment upon it. And it became a federal law, as I said, and stayed in effect until 2011. Now, what happened as a result of that is that, again, without marriage, you didn't have the ability to pass assets to your spouse or your partner as you do when you're married, meaning that there are no gift tax consequences to giving your partner or your spouse your assets. There was no estate tax benefits granted to domestic partners or partners otherwise, so that if in fact somebody died with a taxable estate and left their entire estate to their partner, it would be taxed, whereas a married couple can pass 100% of their assets to their surviving spouse, and there is no tax. So we had assets being depleted between couples as a result of them not having the ability to marry. There were no tax benefits for retirement accounts, no spousal benefits on retirement accounts, and family planning was very, very difficult because a couple generally could not adopt a child, and a couple generally could not have a child via artificial means because they were looked at as being a couple who shouldn't be paired together. They weren't married, they had no rights, et cetera, et cetera. Why are we going to allow you to adopt this child if in fact you don't have rights between yourselves? And it was very difficult. Again, I keep using the word difficult, but people basically who wanted to have children, who wanted to raise children, were being forced to go out and lie. They lied about the fact that they did have domestic partners. They lied about the fact that they would in fact like to marry when that happens, and they adopted children on their own accord. And then we would have to take a very long backstreet approach to doing what's called a second parent adoption. It used to be known as a step-parent adoption, but the phraseology was changed to second-parent adoption because of the fact that everybody's domestic partners were adopting the child that was only the child legally of one parent. Um, you also could not have parents, both parents named on a child's birth certificate at that point. That has changed, but with much difficulty. And the difficulty arises from a lack of education and a lack of information, so that I heard constantly, I have the right to have my child put on my child's birth certificate, to put me as the parent on my child's birth certificate, and clerical people just did not get it. They refused to change the nomenclature from father and mother to parent and parent. And it was kind of demoralizing even when we were allowed to actually have our names added to our children's birth certificate. So that's what I did from a legal perspective, from my own personal legal practice, in an attempt to help people that severely needed the help. And most people just sort of ignored the fact that they needed help because they didn't know where to go. And people generally didn't have those practice areas. But again, in accordance with my bringing up in the Ethical Humanist Society, I also became pretty active. I joined or became very much affiliated with the Long Island LGBT Center and Pride for Youth here in Belmore, which is a division of the Long Island Crisis Center, if anybody's familiar. Excellent organization. And I found my footing in an organization by the name of HRC, the Human Rights Campaign. The Human Rights Campaign is a nationwide organization that very simply seeks equality for all individuals. And you might see their sticker all over. That is basically a yellow and blue equal sign, and that is the definition of HRC, to seek equality. And of course, it does seek equality for people within the LGBTQ community, and is very active at this point. And when it comes to where we need to go, I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail. But over time and bit by bit, we did in fact see marriage equality come to pass. And that started with individual states. It actually first started in Hawaii, and then a couple of other states actually said, okay, we are going to give our residents who are same-sex couples the right to marry. And New York was the 6th state to do that. But prior to New York allowing marriage equality, we had a number of people that were married in other countries, Canada or one of the other 5 states that did allow marriage equality. And unfortunately, some of those relationships dissolved, but they couldn't get divorced because you can only get divorced in the state where you reside, right? But New York didn't recognize marriage equality and therefore didn't recognize divorce between same-sex people. And they couldn't go back to the state where they were married to get divorced because they didn't reside in those states. So we had a number of people who were no longer in a relationship, and it was impossible for them to separate from a legal perspective. And that led to all kinds of issues on the estate planning and estate administration side, and just a general life cycle side. So finally, in 2011, with the Marriage Equality Act, New York did in fact pass marriage equality. And that went on. In 2013, the Edie Windsor case was decided, whereby the federal government had to recognize all marriages that was solemnized in the state. So anybody that had a valid marriage within a state also had their marriage recognized for federal purposes. And in the Edie Windsor case, it was all about estate taxes, the fact that Edie Windsor's spouse died and her estate was going to owe a significant amount in estate taxes. And Edie Windsor said, no, 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 I'm not going along this route. I am going to contest this. And she went through a number of years of contesting it, but she won her case finally in 2013, so that the federal government was then recognizing marriage equality. And then finally in 2015, with the Obergefell case, the Supreme Court decided that as a matter of due process and equal protection, everybody had the right to marry, no matter what your sexual orientation was. So that opened up a world of opportunities for people, not only to get married and have the same type of legal relationship that non-LGBTQ people have, but also to solve those issues with adoption, with children, with family planning, with estate planning. There are, from what I recall, almost 1,200 benefits of marriage that we just didn't have at that point. And now we do. So it's kind of a very wonderful thing. And it's almost impossible to look back, at least in my head, and think, gee, the community never had that before 2011 or so, and that wasn't very long ago. So it's very interesting how the tide changes. Where are we now? Marriage equality. We also have New York, which passed the Parent-Child Security Act in 2020. And that act provided for surrogacy, so that New York residents can now seek to have gestational surrogates give birth to their child, and you have two intended parents and a gestational surrogate. And you can apply to the court before your child is born to have a court order saying that the two intended parents are actually the legal parents of the child when that child is born. That's a huge step from, okay, we're going to do this second parent adoption and we're sending the social worker in to explore your family and your household and make a recommendation and a report as to what the social worker sees the benefit or the pitfalls in having you adopt your partner's child, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It just went on with requirements, all of which were pretty negative. But now you can, in fact, say to the court, I am having this child through a surrogate, and I am the parent, and please tell the world in your court order that I am, in fact, the parent, and it is being done. It's being done with some delay, so usually we would get the court order at this point about 3 months after the child is born, but nevertheless, the paperwork's in, and it sort of works itself out. Gender market changes. New York has come so far with gender market changes. When I first started the practice area, if somebody wanted to change their gender marker, they had to have surgery, as they refer to it as both bottom and top surgery, and they had to have a description of the surgery from their surgeon that needed to be submitted to the court, together with a psychiatrist's evaluation of the person and a petition. And the court often called in people to act as witnesses. And it was a long process, to say the least. So that is no longer required. if somebody wants to change their gender marker now, it's really a matter of declaring what their gender is, and a gender designation can even be an X mark at this point, and that's the case on federal passports as well. So although we still need a court order to do a name change, strangely enough, we don't need a court order to do a gender marker change. I think the best thing that I can say about the LGBT community right here and now is that our young people get it. They just have no problem with somebody's sexual orientation. We don't need gay bars anymore because they don't need to go to them. They just go to the bar with their friends or wherever they're going, all right? And that's the world that we need to see, not only with our young people, but with our more mature people as well. From my perspective, the best thing that I have right now is that I am married to a wonderful man, and we are very happy together and enjoy our children and grandchildren together, and it's a wonderful thing. But there are big hurdles. Obviously, with the inauguration coming up, we have no idea of what is going to happen. But Congress has said that their first order of priority will be to, for lack of a better term, attack the transgender community. And that's going to be a major issue, and it's going to be a major issue strictly because of the fact that people don't understand the transgender community. They're not familiar, they don't know people within that community, and they're fearful for whatever the definition of fear might be in that situation. So, what do we need to do? At this point, I think our focus has to be on the transgender community and making sure that our voices are heard with respect to supporting that community like any other person. They are, in fact, or should be in everybody's eyes, equal as a person. And my quote here in my notes is, think DOMA, all right? DOMA was enacted in the middle of the night, preventing people, same-sex people, from marriage equality, and I am very fearful that something similar to that is going to happen with respect to the transgender community. So what is it that we need to do? We need to have a voice. We need to express our voices, because as you may or may not be familiar, the DEI world, as far as corporations and businesses, is falling apart. It's literally falling apart before our eyes, whereas everybody, every business was very much into diversity, equity, and inclusion over the last number of years. All of a sudden, within the last few months, that has gone from, no, we don't even know, from having it as programmatic parts of business operations to, we don't even know what that is anymore, and we're not going to support it. So when you don't support DEI, and you have people who are applying for a job and who want to get ahead, it's extremely difficult, especially for the transgender community. And I'll give you an example. This example goes back before marriage equality, et cetera, but we represented a teacher in a Catholic high school who transitioned. She was a teacher for over 30 years, got exemplary reviews. The students loved her. And when she transitioned, the school, the diocese said, nope, sorry, you're now worse than being gay, you're out. And we started an action against the school and the diocese. And the best thing that ever could have happened was the support that Marla Krolikowski, this teacher, did in fact receive from her current and former students and parents of her students. Because it was one parent that decided they were not going to support the school monetarily anymore if she kept teaching within the school, and the school picked up on that and said, no, we can't have you any longer. And I think there was something like 20,000 petitions signed online. And when we went to the court that morning, there was a sea of her former students standing on the courthouse steps to support her. And it was just such a wonderful thing. And that's what we need to do. We need to support people in that same fashion. And if anybody is familiar with Gender Equality New York, Julie Gray Owens, who is here on Long Island and is the spouse of I believe, a former member. I don't think she's currently a member, but wonderful person. If you ever want to get involved, just recently with the whole ban on sports things, sports activities in this county, she organized and organized and organized, and I know she would love to have everybody in this room stand behind her as well for efforts of that nature. And I'm encouraged. I am encouraged because even though this election cycle may not have ended up where we wanted it to be, every openly LGBTQ member of the House of Representatives was reelected in this cycle. Sarah McBride, a transgender person from Delaware, was elected to Congress. And she's very nonplussed. When she was elected, somebody came up with a rule, well, you can't use gender-neutral bathrooms, all right? And she said, okay, I'll use my own damn bathroom, all right? That's the type of people that we need also. So yeah, we need activists, we need people to protest, we need people to express their voice, but we also need people to say, hey, you know what? You're stupid, and I'll use my own bathroom, and there's no really big thing here, all right? And I think I'm running out of time, sorry. So my ask of you would be simply to share facts, combat misinformation, speak out, engage businesses. The Human Rights Campaign, HRC, that I mentioned before, has something called the Corporate Equality Index. It was just published for this year last week. Look up the Corporate Equality Index. It consists of businesses that support the LGBTQ community and support those businesses and make it known why you're supporting those businesses. Thank you very much. This is so great. I am so happy to see all of you, people I know well and people I don't, because you're a smiling, welcoming community, and it's just so great to be here. Thanks.